everyone. This is going to be a pretty quick video today because I have very little voice. I've had a cold for a week and I've been performing in 2 shows and very busy with that, and I really need to rest my voice because I have one more show tomorrow. I need to have my voice. So I'm going to make this kind of quick because I'm hoarse. But this week's favorite trip was one of those ones that I said was an exception. If you remember, I said that I didn't have, just with a few exceptions, trips on my list that involved traveling with my parents or my husband. Well, this is one. There's actually this one which involves traveling with my dad and my husband. There's one that I already talked about that was with my dad. That was Disney World 2000, I think. And then there's going to be one more that involves traveling with my husband. But just those 3 are the exceptions on my list. Otherwise, they all involved me either traveling alone or traveling with just my kids. So, okay, the one I'm going to talk about today is Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area in June of 2005. This one involved me, my husband, my dad, my son Andrew, and my daughter Megan, who at the time had just turned 1. She had turned 1 at the end of May, and so she was a baby, and I was actually still nursing her and everything, which was helpful because it was very hot, and she needed to stay hydrated. And we took Amtrak to Washington, D.C., and yeah, that's the last time I took an Amtrak trip. So that's, I think it's the last time my dad took one too. We used to travel, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that we used to travel by Amtrak a lot. But that's the last one we took. So that's, 13, almost 14 years ago. And I think that's no, we took other trips on Amtrak, my dad and me and Andrew. We went to Montana one time and we went to Colorado one time. So Andrew had done Amtrak before. I think that was the only trip on Amtrak that oh no, we went another time when my brother-in-law got married. We took Amtrak out to the West Coast for my brother-in-law's wedding. So that's another time we took Amtrak. So, but that would have been Megan's only trip on Amtrak. And obviously she was way too young to remember it. And Ben has never been on Amtrak. So, which is kind of a bummer because Ben, not so much anymore, but when he was younger, he was a huge train fan. So he's kind of outgrown that a little bit. He still likes trains, but he's not as into them as he used to be. So we took Amtrak out there. And I think for the first few days, we just stayed in a hotel kind of central in Washington, D.C. I remember we could walk to stuff. And we could walk to where the hop-on, hop-off bus tour picked up. And I don't know if we took the metro maybe too. And so the first however many days we were there, we saw all the main Washington, D.C. stuff, the monuments, the mall, the National Archives, different museums, things like that. And then we rented a car after we did all that. And we rented a car from a car rental place at Union Station. And then we drove to Virginia and went to, I'm not remembering the order. I think we went to the Historic Triangle next. So we went to Jamestown. It's kind of a museum, an outdoor museum, if you will, to the Jamestown settlement. There's not a lot there, but there's really good tour guides that kind of explain everything to you. A lot of it's just ruins and kind of excavation, what they think was there. And then the Jamestown or Yorktown, which at Yorktown, there's a very big, cool museum. And it's like a reenactment kind of place where they've rebuilt everything the way that they think it was. And there's an interpretive center there and all these different activities and historical reenactors on site. that kids can do and stuff. And I remember Andrew really liked that place. That place was pretty cool. And then the third thing in the historic triangle, it's Jamestown, Yorktown, and Colonial Williamsburg. Colonial Williamsburg, if you've never been, I highly recommend it. Williamsburg itself is a sizable enough city in Virginia, with all the stuff that modern cities have. And Colonial Williamsburg is just a section of it. I mean, it's literally just like a block or two off of a main part of the city, and they've just kind of preserved and restored this, I don't know how big it is, 6, 8, 10 block area, with, might be bigger than that, you know, several streets, long and wide. And I don't know, I don't remember, I mean, I'm sure I learned when I was there, if they got some of those buildings from other places and moved them there and restored them to make it more complete, because I can't imagine that many buildings, because there's a lot of buildings, were still in usable condition at the time that they made Colonial Williamsburg what it is today. Because I remember when we were there learning that it wasn't like it is now. It's kind of a living history museum, and it wasn't like that, you know, very long ago. I want to say they started the 60s, 70s, 80s. It wasn't that long ago that they did all that they restored it and made it like it is now. And there's several Colonial Williamsburg official hotels on site that you can stay at, and we stayed in one of those. I can't remember which one it was. Kind of a little more modern one that's kind of recommended for families. And then I know it had like a pool and everything. And then there's a fancier one. And then you can even stay in like some of the old colonial houses. And they're really neat. I always kind of wanted to go back and try that. And then there's like the old courthouse, and there's shops, and there's a whole bunch of restaurants, and the stables, and the interpreters that are there that like guide you around at each of the different buildings. You can get different little tours, and it's very interesting. And I remember the one thing we did that Andrew really liked, we did like a nighttime lantern walk. The church that's there is really neat. You learn a lot about our forefathers, like our founding fathers that first came. A lot of stuff from like the Revolutionary War period. And Andrew got to hold the lantern when we went around on this lantern walk at night. And that was really cool. There's all horse-drawn wagons around and everything. There's a blacksmith shop, you know, all sorts of things like that. You could easily spend a few days there. And then, but I remember we could walk, you know, just a block or two and go to like a regular restaurant. And then the College of William and Mary, which is a very old school, it's one of the oldest colleges in the United States, I know that, is very close to there. We could actually walk to the campus. And Andrew still has that. He was very intrigued by that. And when we went there, he was 9, I think. And he just thought that was the coolest place. And he just gave me his list. He's getting ready to apply to law schools, and he has the College of William and Mary on his list of places that he wants to apply. So it's stuck in his mind that he just loves American history. Well, he loves history in general. He's a history minor in college. And he really likes that whole early American history period. So, and then I know there's a Great Wolf Lodge in Williamsburg, not far off of that historic area. And then we also went to, I think this is the last thing we did. I might have these last two things, Williamsburg and this switched around. We went to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And I've talked about this in a couple of my other videos. Busch Gardens, Williamsburg is the one that's like all different countries in Europe themed. I was very pleasantly surprised by Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. It's very lush and green. There's a lot of trees, very shady, a really pretty park, but lots of big rides and everything like they'd have at other Busch Gardens parks. So we did that and had a lot of fun there. Although that was harder for me because I had the baby, because I had Megan. I couldn't really do a lot of stuff because somebody had to be, she couldn't go on anything really. And so somebody had to be holding and taking care of Megan the whole time. And then we returned the car, I think, to Washington, D.C. and took, took the car back. Oh, I do remember when we first left Washington, D.C. to go to the Historic Triangle and stuff, we went out to Arlington National Cemetery, and we just drove by the Iwo Jima, statue, and we drove by the Pentagon and things like that. But we spent, half a day or whatever at the Arlington National Cemetery. This trip was one of my favorites because of getting to see all those cool things. I mean, we saw a lot of cool stuff, and especially getting to see how excited my 9-year-old son at the time was about it. I really think that trip really sparked in him a love of history and, American history, and it really inspired him, and he really, really enjoyed it. So that was fun. It was kind of fun to take the train. It was and it wasn't. Sometimes Amtrak has a lot of delays and can be very slow, and I know we experienced that on this trip. And then the other thing is, we had, I think, 2, across from each other, little sleeper compartments, which is where you have 2 chairs during the day, and then the 2 chairs fold down into 1 bunk, and then they pull down a second bunk on top. So you have 2 bunks. And I don't know who was in one. I feel like maybe my dad and my husband were in one, and me and the kids were in the other one. Or it was me and my husband and Megan and in one, and Dad and Andrew in the other one. I can't remember. But anyway, I know I had to sleep with Megan in my bunk. And, for one person, it's fine. But she was a pretty sizable baby at that point because she was 1. And I kept having to try to move her, I put her between my legs, and then I kind of put her next to me. I remember, I think she slept fine, but I was the one who didn't sleep very well, which is unfortunate because usually on a sleeper car and a train, I sleep very well because the rocking of the train kind of lulls you to sleep. But anyway, and then the only other thing that was a negative about this trip was, oh my gosh, it was hot. And I talked about that in my Washington, D.C. video. I'll put it up here. It was so hot. It was so hot and so humid. And when you look at the pictures of us on this trip, we all have kinky afro hair because, even Megan the baby, we all have just curly hair because it was so humid and we're just sweating. And I remember the day that it was really bad was the day we were at Arlington National Cemetery. That day was so hot. And we walked a lot around the cemetery, and it's hilly. Arlington National Cemetery is not flat. There's a lot of hills, and we had to walk up and down these hills. And then I know at Colonial Williamsburg, I remember being pretty hot there too. But it was okay. And then if it was hot in the city in Washington, D.C., it wasn't unbearable because when you went into stuff, into museums and things, then they were air conditioned, so it was fine. I don't remember that we were in agony or anything. And I remember a few times walking around at night, in the evening, and once the sun set, it was pleasant. So we just all had a really fun time. Everybody got along on that trip. This was fairly early in my marriage. I'd only been married for 2.5, not quite 3 years. We were excited to take a big trip with our little girl, and Andrew was super excited to get to go to Washington, D.C. That was the first time he ever went there. He's been there twice since then without me on school trips. So, and just I must have researched and learned about the Historical Triangle and Busch Gardens and stuff because my dad had never been to those places either. And, they were all just really cool and really interesting. So I highly recommend that as a place to go for a family vacation. So that was another one of my favorite trips ever. And yeah, I think I have 4 or 5 more to share with you. So we're up to 2005. And I have one more that after this that was still with my husband. And then after that, they're all after I got divorced, or after my husband and I split up, and they're just me and my kids. So I thank you all for joining me today and for watching. And thank you for being patient with my hoarse voice. And I hope you all have a happy new year, since I'm going to be posting this around right before New Year's. And I hope you had a happy holiday season with your families. And safe travels, everyone.